Hello, folks. I want to invite you again and welcome you to another Bible study, actually a sermon. If you want to call them Bible studies, I guess talks, whatever it is I want to call them, that's what I'm going to call them. But I do appreciate you watching. I hope that this study will be fruitful for you. I try to be relevant. I try to look at what's happening in our society and think about those things on a regular basis and see how this relates to the Bible. And so the other day I was listening to the radio, and it dawned on me the commercial that was on the radio, and the fact that it was talking about Pride Month. And I got thinking about the number of radio commercials I've heard in the month of July talking about pride. And this kind of one of those things that I realized this is a big deal to a lot of people. And I'm not in too many stores. I don't go to many clothing stores, but one of our members talked about that she had seen something with a rainbow on it and thought it was really neat, so she bought it. And then later on, somebody came up to her and said, "You know what that represents?" And it's the idea of the homosexual movement. And she said the next time she did the store, sure enough, she saw all these articles, clothing, all these things with rainbows on them, and the table, the setting, talked about Pride Month. And so I got thinking about it. I need to talk about this subject somewhat. And that is that Pride Month is a big deal in the homosexual community. And so I was looking up in Wikipedia, it said June is Pride Month, and many U.S. corporations are talking about this. Many U.S. corporations are advertising support for LGBTQ plus community. A new study, however, has found that 25 companies are otherwise eager to wave the rainbow flag and donate more than $10 million to anti-LGBTQ plus federal and state politics over the last 2 years. And so, actually, this article that I was looking at, I want to talk about that there are companies that do not support this, and actually what they meant was that they are actually sending money to candidates that are not pro LGBTQ type people. And anyway, I just got thinking about this as far as the controversy involved in this here. And so I want to look at this from a point of view of the history of Pride Month, start off with, and then also the rainbow and what it represents and to the homosexual community. I want to look a little bit just briefly at the Supreme Court ruling in 2015 and what has meant, the influence of that ruling on our society. And finally, just what the Bible teaches on this. So that's the steps we're going to go through. And I hope you'll consider what we're talking about. And I don't want to be, gay bashing. I don't want to be somebody says being hateful to anybody. I just want to look at it from the point of view of what the Bible teaches on this. And so Pride Month, as I was looking up, says the LGBT Pride Month occurs in the United States to commemorate the Stonewall riots. Now, Stonewall riots occurred in June of 1969, and that was at basically a homosexual nightclub in Greenwich Village, and there was a police that came in and rounded up a bunch of homosexuals, a bunch of people at the nightclub, and basically outside of the nightclub there was a crowd gathered, and there ensued to be a riot. And as a result, many pride events are held during this month to recognize the impact that LGBT people have had in the world. 3 presidents of the United States have officially declared a Pride Month. And so pride parades in many major cities, like cities like Columbus, Ohio has Pride Parade, Washington, D.C. has their Pride Parade, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Denver, all these major cities have some kind of Pride Parade, Pride festivities. It goes along with it. So it is a time of celebration to the homosexual community. The rainbow, and I was just, really did not understand what the rainbow had to do with homosexuality, but the rainbow flag was popularized as a symbol of the great gay community by San Francisco artist Gilbert Baker in 1978. The different colors are associated with diversity in the gay community, but actually have larger meaning. In fact, I was looking up and see, what the different colors represent, and it said the original rainbow had 8 colors, and so the pink stood for sexuality, the red for life, the orange for healing, yellow for the sun, green for nature, turquoise for art, indigo for harmony, and violet for the soul. So that's the idea of those different colors in the flag. And the pride flag is based on the rainbow colors, if you look at that. And so that's how it became associated with the idea of homosexual movement. Now, so that's a little bit of brief history about this. Now, in 2015, the Supreme Court came down with a landmark ruling. Before this time period, a number of states, they had, I don't know how many, 6, 7 states maybe had recognized homosexual marriages. And it had become a big political point. A number of states had also come out and amended the state constitution specifying that marriage was between a man and a woman, what's ultimately called the traditional Christian view of marriage. And so on June 26 of 2015, the court ruled 5-4 that the Constitution guarantees a right to same-sex marriage. And Chief Justice Kennedy, or not Chief Justice, but Justice Kennedy, he wrote the majority opinion, and he says, no longer may this liberty be denied. And so he equated homosexual marriage to a constitutional right, that you have the right to be married if you were homosexual. And so, among many Americans, Judge Roberts, in his dissent of this, he was on the other side, Chief Justice Robert, that he wrote a dissent, and what he says, if you are among the many Americans of whatever sexual orientation who favor expanding same-sex marriage, by all means celebrate today's decision. Celebrate the achievement of a desired goal. Celebrate the opportunity for a new expression of commitment to a partner. Celebrate the availability of new benefits. But do not celebrate the Constitution. It has nothing to do with it. So his point was really quite interesting to me, at least. He said it's not a fact that this was a constitutional issue. The Constitution is not guaranteed marriage to homosexuals, but somebody saying it became more a social phenomenon, a social thing here than a constitutional thing. So that was the ruling of the court. And of course, before that time period, if you had listened to the pundits or those who are pro-homosexual marriage, you would say, well, this is the end all. This is the big solution to the problem of homosexual movement. They need to be recognized as homosexual marriages. And so what's happened is about 1 out of 10 marriages in the United States are homosexual. That's done today. Now, as we look at statistics, the majority of homosexual couples actually don't get married. There is, if you look at numbers, and the numbers I was looking at may have been like 2019, they look at those numbers, there's about 1 million, roughly 1 million homosexual couples. And if you look at homosexual marriages, there's just over 500,000. So just a little bit over 50% of homosexuals actually get married. And when I was looking at this number then, I also thought about, well, what is the number of homosexual marriages in comparison to heterosexual marriages? This is just kind of a curiosity thing on my part. I tend to be a numbers cruncher, so this is one of the things I was just kind of curious about. And what I came up with, there's 62 million, just a little over 62 million marriages in the United States. And so 500,000 out of 62 million. Well, that equates to about 1 out of 128 marriages are actually homosexuals. And so it is a small number that actually get married who are homosexuals. And what I found interesting also was that until this homosexual movement started up with the marriage point, that up to that time, many in our society was actually downplaying the importance of marriage. Many of the major intellectuals and people in news and simply those who were public speakers were saying that marriage is just a piece of paper. Marriage is an outdated, antiquated system. And all of a sudden it became like the end all. Well, it was never really about marriage as much as the homosexual agenda. And so what's happened is that once this became a law of the land, or each state had to recognize homosexual marriages, it was not the end of the issue. It was really just the beginning of many other issues. Many other issues that we've heard discussed in the last number of years. One is bathrooms, public bathrooms. Can a state or can a business specify that this is not just male bathrooms or female bathrooms, but male-only bathrooms or female-only bathrooms? Can a male who says, I want to use a female bathroom, can a business stop them from doing that? Can a state say you should not go there? And so that became one of the big issues, just about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, so on that lines. That was one of the big issues. Dormitories at colleges. And that with recent administration policies, a court case came up, the College of the Ozarks sued the federal government because the federal government had mandated that their dorms, they had to allow males who identified as females to actually be housed in female dorms. Now, again, identified as females doesn't necessarily mean that they were acting like females. Like somebody said, I want to be a female, I want to identify that. And so the college sued and took this court, but the courts originally here at least had ruled in favor of the government. And so what they're saying is, despite the Ozark College saying this is a point of religious doctrine with us, the courts have said you got to allow men to live in women's dorms if they want to identify as women. Males competing as females in athletics. Of course, that's becoming and going to be one of the bigger issues. Again, kind of ironic because our nation has spent quite a bit of money, quite a bit of energy in permitting female-only sports and trying to say they're equal to male sports. So you had female basketball teams, female, whatever the sport was. And they had the same amount of money had to be spent on them as on the males. And then all of a sudden we're starting to say, well, males can actually compete on female teams and female athletics. And this has created problems because, a lot of times the males are bigger and they are stronger because just body type. Martina Navratilova weighed in on this here. And Martina Navratilova was a world-class tennis player, won many major events, an open lesbian. And her statement was that letting men compete as women is unfair. It's not fair to the women. This being the election year, that the Olympic Committee has, the Worldwide Olympic Committee, not the U.S., just worldwide, has said that they will allow men to compete as women and with certain limits on their testosterone. It had to be below a certain limit and had to be for a year. And so there's already been reports, for instance, Laurel Hubbard. Laurel Hubbard is a weightlifter from New Zealand. And she's going to compete in the Olympics. And here's the headline. It says, Laurel Hubbard, the transgender weightlifter for New Zealand, has been effectively guaranteed a place at a delayed Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. Of course, delayed because of COVID last year, so 2021 actually. After the approval of an amended qualifying system by the International Olympic Committee. And so she or he, how you want to refer to her, is going to compete in the Olympics as a woman, although it's actually a man. Another headline, let's talk about this, says trans athletes are posting victories and shaking sports. Transgender athletes at all levels of sport are winning medals, spurring a contentious debate over the future of gendered competition. And there have been various cases of, again, records being set of young men competing as women in that women track and field type activities and winning despite the fact that these are supposed to be women sports. And then finally, transgender school in our schools. And that is that in the last number of months here, one particular school system has kind of gotten a lot of attention for a number of reasons, but this is Loudoun County School System in Virginia. And basically, in an article written just a couple of days ago, June 23rd, it says the Loudoun County Public Schools is currently pursuing an appeal against teacher Tanner Ross, who refused to affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa because it's against my religion. And what the school system have done was they have said that if a student A male student will be referred to as a female student as by him, her, or she. Then the teacher had to refer to that student that way. And this teacher here, Tanner Ross, somebody said, I can't do that because it's against my religion. That boy is a boy. I don't care how he wants to identify, he's a boy. That girl's a girl. And so they fired him, and then this went to court, and the court actually supported the teacher, saying he's right. But the school board has now appealed that, and also this will still stay in the courts. So all these things are connected with the homosexual movement, just kind of explaining where we're at with this. And finally, I just mention, and it's almost comical if it was for the seriousness of the matter, but all of us have seen or heard the acronym LGBT, and that is lesbian, gay, I got to think about the B here, bisexual, transgender. Well, then it got expanded to Q. And Q for queer. And then A, an I. And the I was for intersex. And that is somebody that can identify either way. And then the A stood for asexual or agender. They do not consider themselves to be the boy or girl, a man or woman. And then they got expanded more. And now the acronym is, and just kind of stay up with me if you can, LGBTQIAAP, where the second Q stands for questioning, the I stands for intersex, the first A for asexual, and then the last A stands for allies, and the P stands for pansexual. Now, if you want to know what all that means, get on your Google, get on your computers, and look at definitions. But a lot of it means the same thing. But they're simply expanding this list. There's almost become like a bragging right if you can make this list somehow. Now, I said all that because we just need to go back to what the Bible teaches. And we just need to understand something. First, about the rainbow. In Genesis 9 chapter, this was after the flood of Noah, in Genesis 9 chapter, verse 13, that God speaking says, I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I'll remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood, destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. So let's not confuse the rainbow of the gay pride movement with the rainbow in the Bible. The rainbow of the Bible had nothing to do with diversity or inclusiveness. It was not a symbol of inclusiveness. Okay, that's not what the rainbow is about in the Bible. The same thing, the rainbow was a symbol of God's providence, God's covenant to never destroy the world by flood again. That was the purpose of that rainbow. Again, not the same purpose as the gay pride rainbow. The rainbow in the Bible is not a sign of God's acceptance of sin. It's not even important. And I remember sometimes hearing people say, well, the rainbow says that God was sorry he flooded the world by, destroyed the world by flood. I actually didn't say that. In my reading right there, did not say that. It said, God simply said, I'm not going to do that again. Here's the sign of my covenant with you. And the final thing is, let's not forget that the flood during the days of Noah was because of man's sins. In Genesis 6 verse 5 it said, Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That man was sinful, and God punished him because he had grown so sinful in his lifestyle. So that's what about the rainbow. Now, the marriage in the Bible. Now, from the beginning, if you go all the way back to Genesis, you see that God was the one that created this relationship as a relationship between a man and a woman. Genesis 2, verse 24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So that is the design of the marriage relationship. Jesus, many years later on, Jesus was asked a question in Matthew 19 chapter about, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? Now the fact is that man has often perverted the marriage relationship. We see that in the Bible. It was too long after Genesis 2nd chapter. We start reading about man having two wives. And that's not the way God designed it. And then we find out man having multiple wives, many more wives than that. God always meant for this relationship from the very beginning to now to be the same. And so Matthew 19 chapter and verse 4, it said, the answer said to them, have you not read that he made the beginning, made them male and female? And it said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God's joined together, let not man separate. The last part there needs to be interesting, needs to be stressed here, because therefore, here it says, here's what God's created. God created man and woman in a marriage relationship. Doesn't matter what else you try to do about it, that's the way God designed it. Therefore, you don't have a right to change that. What God's joined together, let not man separate. You cannot redefine what marriage is in the eyes of God. So two men living together as men, two women living together as women, multiple people living together, all kind of different perversions we have today, all those are in the same category of sexual sins, of being sinful. I just want to end here by looking at Romans 1st chapter. In Romans 1st chapter, as Paul describes the sins of the Gentiles, the downward spiral that the Gentiles had as they rejected God. In verse 21 it says, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professed to be wise and became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God to an image made like corruptible men, and birds, four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness, and the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged truth of God for the lie, worshiping sort of the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even the women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burn in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving themselves the penalty of the error which was due. And even as they denied to retain God their knowledge, God gave them over to debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. So you look at this whole chapter or verse here, number of verses here in Romans 1st chapter, and I see the way of thinking. And so look at this. How were they looking at their actions? They said they suppressed the truth and unrighteousness. That they did not want to appeal to God. They did not care about God's word, what the truth was. They didn't care. The second is they exchanged the truth for a lie. You see a commonality here. They weren't concerned about the truth, but they were willing to believe a lie instead. They did not like to retain God their knowledge. God revealed to them what he wanted them to do, but they didn't want to keep that knowledge. And fourth thing, they became futile in their thoughts. Man let himself can come up with idle speculation, all kind of different ideas, all kind of different lifestyles. Whether we're talking about two men living together or two women, or we're talking about threesome, or we're talking about community living, no matter how it is you want to describe it, man come up with all these different ideas. You said they became futile in their thoughts. Their actions. Their action describes said they were foolish, verse 21. They did not act with wisdom. They simply did things that didn't make any sense. They were foolish. They were shameful in verse 27. And not something to be proud about, not something to boast about, but something to be ashamed of. And they said not fitting in verse 28. What they're doing is not proper. And finally, God. What did God do? He said in verse 24, God gave them up to their uncleanness. Now, it took me a while to realize this, but uncleanness in the Bible doesn't mean that they didn't get baths. What it meant was that morally they were unclean. It usually dealt with some kind of sexual behavior that wasn't necessarily adultery, but they were unclean morally speaking, sexually. They gave them up to vile passions. You want to do that? Go ahead. It didn't stop them. Didn't approve of it, but didn't stop them. They went on in their vile passions, and finally to their debased mind. He gave them up to their debased mind, their mind that was not concerned about worldly, spiritual things, but only on worldly things. And so as you look at that, you realize that this is not something to be proud of. Pride Month ironically not, is a month of sin, a month of arrogance, a month of being haughty. A month saying, I don't care what God says. I don't care how God defines marriage or how God defines my relationships. But I'm determined to go on in sin. Now, we need to love the souls of these people. I'm not saying we need to be hateful to them, or we need to, I'm not trying to be gay bashing or anything like that, but we need to understand that our young people, as they're growing up, as they're going to school, they're seeing this, they're hearing about the virtues of homosexuality, and we need to be aware of that. And we need to be able to point to what the Bible teaches and point out it's not an alternative lifestyle in the sense of just another lifestyle. It is a sinful lifestyle. So I appreciate you watching, and I hope maybe that this here has been a study that has kind of got your mind working and thinking about this. But we always want to do what the Bible says. We always want to love those, even those who are in sin. We need to love them, but we cannot love the sin. We need to teach what the Bible teaches. I appreciate you watching. If you can, come be with us, Lilac Road. Our building is located 1687 Lilac Road, Litchfield, Kentucky. We have services on Sunday mornings at 9:30. We have Bible classes. Then at 10:25 on Sundays, we have worship. At 5 p.m., we have worship again. And then on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m., we have Bible classes again. I appreciate you watching. Any comments you want to make on this program, feel free to do that. Feel free to share this with others. Hit the like button if you deem it likable, you like what I was talking about, and or you approve or you understand what we're saying. And I hope that we maybe have opportunity to talk and to study together again in the future. Thank you.